Good evening and welcome to Crawley Borough Council's Overview and Scrutiny Commission meeting of the 23rd of November 2020. Welcome members of the press and public watching this meeting live. I am Councillor Tina Bellman, Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. This is a meeting being held in public and not a public meeting. There will be no public question time at any council meeting while virtual committee meetings are being held. So I'd like to stress the public and press can still hear and see the meeting, but public speaking has been suspended and any written questions submitted in advance that were deemed acceptable by the councillor's monitoring officer will be read out as answered. There will be no supplementary questions. The agenda for this meeting is published and available on the council's website. For any committee meeting held virtually, all voting will be held by a recorded vote taken by a Democratic Service team member on behalf of the chair. The exceptions to this are the approving of the minutes from the previous meeting or any other procedural item, or where the item's sole recommendation to the Commission is to note the report. For those items, the chair will move the item and it will be presumed agreed unless a dissenting comment from any Commission member is made. Before I invite members of the Commission to confirm their attendance, I ask that they please ensure their mobile phones are switched off or are on silent, their backgrounds are plain or nondescript, and they are aware of their surroundings so they are not disturbed during the meeting. This includes making sure all TVs, radios and smart speakers are switched off, please. Commission members are reminded that they should have their microphones turned off unless speaking, and their cameras turned off unless they are requesting to speak. When asked to speak, please turn your camera on, unmute yourself and pause for 3 seconds to allow for the slight time connection delay. With this in mind, Commission members are asked to be aware of who they will follow in the voting process and prepare accordingly. May I ask the officers supporting this meeting to introduce themselves, giving their name and job title, please.
Chris Padlow, Democratic Services Manager.
Heather Girling, Democratic Services Officer. And I'd like to note, Chair, we have received no apologies for absence. However, Councillors McAlaney and Sharma are currently not on the meeting feed.
Thank you, Heather. We will now take in introductions together with items 2 and 3. Please can I ask committee members, when called upon, to confirm their name and the ward they represent, if they have any declarations of interest and whipping declarations to make, and if they agree the minutes of the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission held on the 2nd of November 2020.
Councillor Aylings.
Hello, my name's Councillor Ayling. I'm the ward member for Bewbush and Broadfield North. I have no declaration of interest and I agree the minutes. Thank you.
Councillor Belvin.
Councillor Tina Belvin, representing Pound Hill North and Forge Wood. I have no declarations of interest or whipping declarations to make and I agree the minutes of the last meeting.
Councillor Bob Burgess.
Councillor Bob Burgess, ward member for Three Bridges. No declaration of interest, no whipping declarations, and I approve the minutes.
Councillor Richard Barrett.
Yes, thank you. Richard Barrett, ward member for Pound Hill North and Forge Wood ward. I declare a personal interest in item 9, Health and Adult Social Care Select Committee, as a member of West County Council. And I agree the minutes of the last meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Lanza.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Bob Lanza, member for Pound Hill South and Worth. I agree the previous minutes. I will declare a personal interest in item 6, Budget Strategy, as a member of West Sussex County Council. Thank you.
Councillor Mallet.
Good evening. Councillor Shehzad Malik from Langley Green and Tushmore Ward. I do not have any disclosure or declaration to make. I do approve the minutes, but I must mention that I only joined the last meeting as an attendee due to the technical issues. Thank you.
Councillor McElhaney. Just for clarity, I've just had confirmation that Councillor McElhaney might be on the public feed, so we'll give him a chance to try to join the members feed. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Pennington.
Good evening, Councillor Alison Pennington, Pound Hill South and Worth Ward. I have no disclosures of interest or whipping declarations, and I'm very happy to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 2nd of November.
Councillor Rana.
Good evening. I'm Councillor Tahira Rana of Broadfield. I have no declarations of whipping to declare, and I agree with the minutes of the last meeting. Thank you.
Finally, Councillor Sharma, are you on the feed? Again, I believe Councillor Sharma is on the public feed, so hopefully Councillor McElhaney and Sharma will join the meeting feed later. Chair.
Thank you. The Commission agrees the minutes of the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission held on the 2nd of November 2020 are an accurate record of the meeting. Public question time. I can confirm that we've had no written questions have been received from the public. So moving on to agenda item 5, we'll now move on to the consideration of the reports, beginning with the commission submission of the Pauli local plan 21 to 37, report from Councillor Peter Smith, Clem Smith, Sally Lappage and Elizabeth Brigden. Please can I ask Councillor Peter Smith to introduce the report to the Commission. Thank you. Peter? Is Peter Smith?
Do one of the officers prepared to happy to present the report?
Can we ask Elizabeth?
Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for stepping in.
No problem. Yes, thank you, Commission, for taking the opportunity to consider the local plan. The report sets out that, as you will recall, the local plan came before full council and yourselves this time last year, and we were ready to submit the local plan. We went out to public consultation in January earlier this year, and then we subsequently had a number of reasons to hold the submission of the plan. I see Councillor Smith is available now. Do we want to swap back over, or shall I carry on? I'll carry on. In terms of the report, it's coming back to full council, and it's being seen by yourselves and Cabinet with the recommendation to approve it at full council. The draft report highlights the key changes that have been made since the local plan was previously seen by yourselves at the end of last year, and we are happy to answer any questions with regards to the local plan and the changes that have been made. I don't know if there are any particular questions that anyone wants to ask.
Bring in Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I had no I've been on the meeting from the beginning, but I had no controls to switch the camera or the sound on. I don't really have significantly different comments to make to what Elizabeth's already said introducing the report, but I do want to remind members that we do have the government's proposals planning for the future, which include an option, if they pass them through Parliament, that if we have an adopted local plan on schedule, that we will get a delay of execution, if you will, with their new proposals of, I think, something like 18 months. So our officers have done a great job revising the plan for us and bringing it forward to OSC and to Cabinet on Wednesday. And it takes into account all the requirements from national government on the NPPF and the changes that are needed following advice from a planning inspector. And I hope that the Overview and Scrutiny Commission will be able to support the local plan and this version, the submission version of the local plan, and support it in their recommendations to Cabinet. Thank you, Chair. You're on mute, Chair.
Thank you, Peter and Elizabeth, for the introduction. The process for discussion on the report will be as follows. Each committee member will have the opportunity to speak. Please indicate you wish to speak by turning your camera on. When you're called on to speak, please unmute your microphone and check that you are live before making your comments, pausing for 3 seconds to allow for the time delay. Once you have spoken, please ensure you turn your camera off and mute your microphone. All committee members who have indicated will be called on to provide comments and ask questions in turn, with officers responding to any queries raised. If there are to be any proposed amendments to the recommendation, then please propose these during this round of providing comments. We will now begin the consideration of the report. Thank you, Councillor Barrett.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And obviously, I welcome this report and the opportunity to bring the local plan forward for discussion. I have 2 questions, if I may, and then a comment that I'd like to make. So, if you're happy for me to do those one by one, it's 2 factual questions. The first is on paragraph 5.6. Which explains this process whereby the Planning Inspectorate Advisory Service actually provided us advice with an advisory planning inspector. This is something I'd not heard of before, and I just wondered if Elizabeth could explain, is that a new process? Is it something that's only just become available recently? Because I didn't think we'd done that in the past. I may have missed it, but I just wondered if it's something new.
It's not new. We did go through the process for the previous local plan as well. So it's something that's been offered for the last certainly 5 to 6 years by the Planning Inspectorate, and it's been pushed quite heavily by the government now to recommend that plans go through the Planning Inspectorate before they get submitted. Yes, yeah, to iron out any problems and ensure that plans aren't submitted that would otherwise cause problems in as part of the system.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And then the second one is on paragraph 5.9. And it's I'm not sure how many bullet points down now it is, actually. It's about 8 or 9 down, and I may need to declare a personal interest as a member of West Sussex County Council asking this question, if that can just be noted. It says one of the changes is removal of section 106 contribution requirement towards education. Instead, this will be met through the community infrastructure levy to respond to viability evidence. The question I had is, that's fine if it's a procedural thing that it's coming through SIL rather than section 106, but will it affect the quantum of funding that's actually received? Because obviously the county council has a major need in terms of providing new places in schools for those children that require them. We no longer build our own schools, because all new schools have to be free schools or academies, but we do continue to extend existing schools in areas where there's new development. And whilst there's basic need grant from government, the Section 106 money obviously helps as well. So what I'm getting at is there any way in which Crawley children will lose out by having a smaller amount of money if it's coming still rather than Section 106, or would it still be the same amount but just coming through a different means?
Yeah, it's a requirement that the developments can mitigate against their impacts. So it is a procedural one. It's one where the County Council Education Authority would put forward their bids and their projects and secure the contribution via the SIL process rather than Section 106. The Section 106 approach was one that we would proposing through the last round of the draft plan, so it's not necessarily one that we do currently, and so it would be making sure that what we provide for education is essentially the same whichever way it comes, but it's making sure that the developers don't pay twice, which then has the knock-on effect on viability.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the final thing, well, it's not a question, it's a comment, and I'm sure, you know, a number of members in the meeting will expect me to be saying this, that I have to say I have very, very serious concerns about the proposed allocation of the Gatwick Green employment area. This proposal has sort of been bubbling under for a number of years. A number of residents in the Fernhill area have been aware of it for many years. They've been concerned about it and about the effect it would have on them and the environment in that part of the borough. And they've always been reassured by the fact that it is safeguarded land and that it probably wouldn't happen. But now we have got to this point where it is being brought forward. It wasn't part of the original draft, but it is coming in now. And my concern as a local member is that whilst I can see the need for that type of provision within the borough, I don't believe that's the right place for it. And I believe that it is going to seriously erode what we used to call the strategic gap between Gatwick and Hawley. If you look at what's proposed on the proposals map, it's going to take up most of the western side of Fernhill. It's going to extend from the borough boundary right down to Antlands Lane. And actually, when you consider the fact that the Forge Wood built up boundary is now going to extend pretty much as far as Radford Road with the new development in which was approved on appeal. The length of the gap is effectively going to be from the Radford Road, Balcombe Road junction up to Antlands Lane, and that's it. And you know, that is one of the last remaining tracts of open countryside in the borough. Not to mention the huge effect it's obviously going to have on residents in that area who previously had a rural environment and will now be living, you know, cheek to jowl with an industrial development. So, you know, I do have very serious concerns about that as a ward member. It's something residents have raised with me over a number of years as something that they feared would happen and that we were hoping wouldn't ever happen. And you know, the fact that it's been put in is going to be a very big blow to the people who live in that area. And really, I mean, you know, obviously I can see a number of cameras on and people are going to want to respond and you know, saying the reasons for that. I'm not really asking questions. I'm just really stating what my view is. You know, and I know there is going to be a huge outcry from residents up there, you know, once the allocation is actually notified to them. Thank you.
Councillor Peter Smith.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question, Richard. I only want to speak briefly on this, and I'll leave it to Sally and the experts to give you the full technical response. But this is an issue that we understand that residents were going to have some discomfort with this proposal, but we need to recognise that in Crawley we're losing land for employment purposes, including places like the base, which used to be an office building and is going to become shortly a so-called logistics building. So we're losing job opportunities on sites like that. And at the same time, we're faced by a very serious level of unemployment coming our way. So we do need to make sure that our local plan is able to deal with the needs of our community for employment, as well as trading against the safeguarding and also the need to preserve green space. So some of the things we have to do at times in the local plan are not what we would necessarily choose to do, but it is about a balance between conflicting priorities. And there are some underlying technical issues about this particular area, which Elizabeth will explain far better than me, but I wanted to make sure that we're all clear about the need to provide employment opportunities for Crawley people going forward. Thank you.
Sally Lappage.
Hi, yes, thank you. I just would sort of reiterate that our local plan evidence is showing that in order to support the creation of new jobs and to fulfil the potential of the local economy, Crawley needs about 24 hectares of new employment floor space, taking into account other sites that we know about within the built-up area. The NPPF requires us to meet our development needs, including those for employment purposes, within the borough if we're able to do so. Crawley is predominantly built up, and as we are now aware that we need to continue to safeguard large areas of land for the potential future southern runway at the airport, and with Gatwick's master plan showing the Gatwick Green site only for surface parking, this is the only area that we feel is capable of accommodating the development of a strategic employment location without, in our view, prejudicing the potential future runway. But in recognition of the sensitivity and the sensitive location of the site, the allocation policy for Gatwick Green for the strategic employment location has been carefully drafted. It sets out lots of parameters that the developers would have to address, including ensuring that it's designed and laid out to achieve an appropriate transition to and relationship with neighbouring residential and commercial and countryside areas, and ensuring it includes appropriate landscaping and public open space to reinforce the identity of the site and its separation from Gatwick, Hawley and the wider countryside. Other issues are also covered in detail in the policy, including proposed uses for the site, transport and access, sustainable design requirements, and how it will complement other employment locations, including the town centre and Manor Royal. Really important to note that the allocated site that you'll see when you look at the local plan map is much larger than the anticipated built area of any development scheme. And that's because of the expectation that any development in that sensitive location is carefully master planned to ensure that the comprehensive supporting infrastructure is in place, but also to ensure that appropriate landscaping, buffer zone structural landscaping, planting, and to ensure the protection of the amenity of neighbouring properties. We know that we need to give particular attention to the relationship with the Gatwick Wood Biodiversity Opportunity Area and existing properties around the site, and we are looking at the appropriate landscape buffer to keep that sense of separation between the site and adjoining countryside and settlements. Obviously aware though that despite all of those caveats and the policy controls that we're trying to put in place, that this is a significant change for this area and residents and occupiers in the area. And the proposed allocation of the site is one of the main reasons that we're repeating our Regulation 19 consultation in January, to give residents and businesses in the area that opportunity to comment, both on the principle of the allocation, but also on the detail of the policy itself. Any representations made will be considered by the planning inspector, and representatives, residents can take part in the examination itself if they want to. It's really just an urge to encourage people to get involved formally through the local plan consultation process.
Councillor Burrows, would you like to come back at all?
Well, I mean, just to thank Peter and Sally for the explanations. I mean, obviously, as you know, as a fellow ward councillor, Peter kindly sent us an extract from the local plan. a couple of weeks ago explaining all of this, and I've read that thoroughly, and I fully understand the justification for allocating land for these purposes, and I have no problem with that. It's the particular location that I'm concerned about, and obviously we'll have this is the first time it's been raised in a public meeting. We'll obviously have ongoing discussions about that over the coming weeks. So really, I just wanted to raise it here, but I thank them for thank Peter and Sally for their their contributions and for explaining the rationale behind it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. So have all committee members had their opportunities to speak? So we will now move on to the recommendation. I move that the Commission notes the report and request that the views expressed during the debate are fed back to the Cabinet through the Commission's comment sheet, and ask that the Vice Chair second. Councillor Rana, please can you second?
Yes, Chair, I second that.
The recommendations are agreed. I'd like to thank Sally and Elizabeth for the comprehensive report and all the hard work that continuously goes into compiling the local plan documentation. Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 6. We're now going to receive the budget strategy 21-22 to 25-26 from Councillor Lamb, Karen Hayes and Paul Windloss. Please can I ask the leader to introduce and present the report to the committee? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think we're all aware of the difficulties that the Council is set to face next year, and indeed for a number of years to come, financially, brought about predominantly by the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact upon the Council's various sources of income. This report will not set out in detail precisely the approach the Council is going to take in terms of those things which are planned to be cut, partly because we haven't taken that decision yet. All members need to have the opportunity to consider and respond based on the consultation which is recently put out to the public, and we are still working our way through agreeing that. But what this report does do is it sets out the context in which the budget decisions are being taken, and it sets out the general approach which is going to be used. Partly it talks about the reserve, which is going to be created out of existing reserves to deal with any further COVID-19 related expenditure for areas where we don't get additional government funding. We know in particular when it comes down to things like leisure contracts, there are considerable cost risks to the local authority, and that it's important that we have money to set aside to be able to deal with this. I think a lot of people are unaware that a council which once had reserves of over 100 million, actually how little of what is left is actually spendable. It's a very small amount. The reality is that what is currently in those accounts is set to be used in the near future, or is essential for providing the level of protection that residents need to ensure business continuity at the local authority in the event of a shock. We're proposing a £4.95 council tax increase. The reality is that this is not going to greatly exceed inflation, so it's not going to do a whole lot to deal with the council's costs. In fact, it's going to be less council tax probably coming in next year than this, because of the numbers of people who will be removed from paying council tax on the basis of being in receipt of council tax benefit. So we will be seeing less in council tax, despite the fact that we're putting up council tax next year. But it remains the case that residents today are still paying less in real terms in terms of their council tax than they were back in 2006, some 14 years ago. The report specifies that we're going to build 4 years of potential flexibility into the budget to deal with a lot of these impacts. But I want to be clear with members that we're going to try and get through these as quickly as possible. If there is a long-term position that we need to get ourselves through, then we'll do it in a sustainable way, but that we want to skip that in a fairly rapid pace, because we don't want to be in a position where we are hemorrhaging money through reserves when ultimately we don't have that money to spare any longer. The council's approach is going to be one based on efficiencies and savings on the one hand, and also trying to increase income, and those increased incomes will come primarily in the form of increased prices for services that the council provides. But certainly our approach of recent years, where we've invested in order to generate additional income for the local authority. That is very much on hold right now, for the simple reason that anything in terms of economic activity at the moment is high risk, and we have very little guarantee of returning to normal anytime soon. We've very much been left with one route for dealing with this year's budget, and that is through trying to make savings as opposed to trying to generate new income. Now, all of the particulars of this will be set out in detail in the budget. The two areas which have generally escaped conversation over recent weeks and months have been the capital programme, the council's spending on new facilities, which we are not really looking to bring forward any additional capital spending at the moment. If it's going to have to happen, it will be driven by necessity throughout the course of the year, as opposed to setting out a programme of capital spending simply because our priorities right now are very much focused on dealing with the issues we're currently facing. It is worth noting, of course, that the town hall continues to be built at pace, and we are very much reminded by our consultants that that stands to generate significant income for the council when it is up and running. It's not us buying ourselves a shiny new office building. It's very much a case of reducing our costs through a more efficient building and trying to generate new income that will help to subsidise people's services in future. Lastly, the HRA, which is the money that comes in from tenants, that continues to have a programme of investment, yes, in terms of maintaining properties, but in particular trying to bring forward new housing, affordable housing for local residents over the coming year. It's not really been discussed much at the moment, but the truth is that the HRA, not just this local authority, but authorities up and down the country, are, while they're not as badly off in terms of their income stream as the council is in terms of its revenue, the reality is that with increasing numbers of residents defaulting on rent, but also the government's push to get more people into home ownership, means that we're seeing a significant decline in the stock the council has. We saw a big increase in total numbers of people buying their council properties, and all of that is less money coming back in to pay for council housing at the end of the day. So we are likely to suffer some pressures around that. I think the figure which I heard is if we build 100 houses in a year, we typically lose 75 to right to buy. So it's going to be a very long time at the current rate before we can get town's population housed. I believe that's the conclusion of my summary report, but I'm very open to questions that members may well have.
Thank you for the report. The process for discussion will be as before. Each committee member will have the opportunity to speak. Please indicate by turning your camera on. When you're called to speak, please unmute your microphone and check that you're live before making your comments, pausing for 3 seconds to allow for the time delay. Once you have spoken, please ensure you turn your camera off and mute your microphone. Thank you. We will now begin consideration of the report. Councillor Lanza.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the leader for and his team for the report. Just a question on paragraph 6.2, the summary of assumptions on page 26. This table makes assumptions about the pay award, and I'll refer specifically to the municipal year 2021 to 2022. If there were to be a public sector pay freeze, which I'm not necessarily advocating, by the way, and how would that impact the revenue projections, given that we're assuming a 2% increase in pay? And just a couple of observations on paragraph 6.2.3. This refers to the pension fund administered by West Sussex County Council. I think the paragraph makes the point about the benefits of effective investment, because the way that pension fund is so fully funded is generating a saving for this Crawley Borough Council of almost £140,000 in 2021-22. And I think it worth restating the leader's point as well, that in real terms the council tax is lower than it was in 2006. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lanza. Can I bring in Councillor Lamb first, then bring in Karen, please? Councillor Lamb.
Thank you. So, I mean, to deal with the second point first, as a former trustee of the local government pension fund in West Sussex, I very much agree with the principle of keeping it fully funded. Where organisations have coasted along in the past, they've found they've built up huge deficits, and that's responsible for an awful lot of, I think, some quite unwise decisions which businesses have taken over the years to reduce the benefits available to the members of those schemes, bearing in mind it is those members own money. I believe West Sussex's pension fund is just about the best funded in the country, and long may that continue. On the issue of the pay award, we are not necessarily dictated to by central government as to what's going to happen with local government pay. It's negotiated, as I'm sure you're aware, Councillor Lanza, by a committee of employee representatives and employer representatives. They do often take the lead from the government at large. It's very difficult to argue for a pay increase at the same time as other people's pay is being frozen, particularly if you're at the same time telling government you haven't got enough money to pay for things and the government's not increasing the pay that they're putting out there. A trickier situation would be in the event that part of the public sector receives a pay increase, such as NHS workers, while the rest of it is frozen, and then the council is left to decide, well, not this council, but nationally, councils are left to decide what the most appropriate reaction to that is. If we may not, it may well be the case we do end up with a pay freeze on that basis. If that's the case, then I think the reality is that that's not reducing all of the pressure into the future years, and to some extent, there may well be money we want to put aside for now to deal with future shocks that may well come through, rather than committing to deal with anything right now. We have a number of difficult years ahead of us, and just because it's not coming through now does not mean it's not going to go up in the future year.
Councillor Lanza, do you want to come back, or would you like Karen to?
Oh, Karen's coming in anyway. I mean, I thank the leader for his answers. It's just that the one missing piece was the cash estimate in the event that there was a pay freeze, following through all the reasoning that would be necessary before it occurred.
Karen Hayes.
Karen?
Good evening. That figure would be approximately 350,000. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bob Burgess.
Thank you. I'm referring to page 37, the future year savings, and under the Planning and Economic Division, it says Town Centre Manager vacancy, and my reading of it is that there's going to be a saving of one full-time equivalent person. We all know that Alfredo, who used to be the Town Centre Manager, but sadly he's had to retire. It does seem to me to be a retrograde step to be thinking of cutting out a Town Centre Manager at a time when the Town Centre is going to need as much help as it can get. I'd welcome sort of people's views on that, please. Thank you.
Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we are going to need to put a lot of resource into the town centre, and a lot of resource is being put in, but it's worth bearing in mind, of course, that a town centre bid has been set up for the purposes of managing the town centre, and it will ultimately be funded by the large local businesses in the town centre for deciding what the approach to that area is going to be, with much the same success, no doubt, as we had in the case of the Manor Royal bid. At the time the Manor Royal bid was set up, you might recall that we had economic development officers working in Manor Royal at that time, and just subsequently been replaced by the bid taker on that role. That isn't to say the council isn't going to play a role, but I think that, if we're looking forward to the next year, a lot of the hands-on approach that Alfredo certainly brought to the role isn't going to be needed until things really are back up and running again. So it's not a case, I think, of the council stepping away, but it is acknowledging that we now do have other things at play which can take on more of a role than has previously been the case.
Okay, thank you. Can I come back on that, please? Can I come back on that, please? Thank you very much for your answer, Peter. Yeah, the town centre bid is very good, but I still do feel that the council will need to sort of almost be putting an arm around their shoulder at a time which is going to be immensely difficult for them. Okay, I think we need to be helping them out, whatever we can be doing. Thank you.
Well, I don't think the council's stepping away. I mean, we still have an economic development team which work very much with the bid, but there is an acknowledgement, I think needs to be the case, that at this point, you know, they are taking over a lot of the running and decision making around that, and it would be wrong for us to interfere excessively. Certainly, I know when we interfere too much in manner of oil, we get quite a lot of pushback from the bid there. We feel that's, bear in mind, they're elected by or nominated by those local businesses and funded by those local businesses that they are the voice for that area. But you know, I think people need to be minded that, you know, we are looking at having to make a £2.25 million saving next year. So, you know, this is a zero-sum game. If something is taken out of the savings, then you have to put something else back into the savings to make up for it. And if it's an area where actually officers, you know, speaking with those involved in the area of the view that resource is no longer needed, then we think we've got to be very careful about that, because potentially where resource is needed, we're removing it in order to maintain one that is no longer required in quite the same way it used to be.
Councillor Peter Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add, I very much agree with you, Bob Burgess, about the incredible job that Alfredo Mendes did for us in our town centre. He'd worked there many years and was very well known, but the officers have taken the opportunity to make this saving, but not by ceasing to do the work, as Peter Lamb has just been explaining. We're enhancing the support for the town centre with the bid, but we've also assigned another economic development officer, actually somebody who was an apprentice. We've just hired him full time, and we do have people stepping into Alfredo's shoes as best they can. And in particular, they're working on supporting the market and keeping the market going at the moment. So we're not ignoring it. We're just doing the best we can with less resources, as many parts of the town hall are having to do at the moment.
Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Yes, thank you. As the chair is aware, I've got a number of questions, and I know she wants me to do a few at a time, and then come back if others want to speak. Firstly, on paragraph 1.2 refers to balancing the budget over a 3-year period, but recommendation 2.2D refers to doing this over the course of 4 years. Which of these is actually correct?
Karen?
Good evening. We previously looked to balance the budget over 3 years, but now we want to balance over 4 years. I probably didn't get that message across properly, but it's 4 years.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you very much. Next one is paragraph 5.3, table 2, which is at the top of page 25. I wonder if Karen could explain a bit more fully what this is actually showing. The line at the bottom of the table labelled total budget for the year, is that the amount of business rates we're left with to spend after the transfer from the equalisation reserve has been applied? And also the text immediately below that table refers to a transfer of £2.330 million to that reserve in the current financial year, but I can't see where that figure fits into the table.
Paul Windus.
Paul? Paul? Would you like to answer that one? Paul, are you there?
I am, yes. sorry, my screen's frozen. The current year is not in the table, so that's the 2.33 million, and we anticipate transferring that to the reserve in the current year because the collection fund transfers to the general fund what was budgeted for, and this was pre-COVID. However, we also budgeted to pay a levy. If business rates income is down, we still account for the transfer from the collection fund as per the budget, but the levy payment is reduced, and so the outturn for business rates in the general fund overall is higher than budget. At year end, the collection fund will be in deficit, and that's then collected from the general fund in the following years, so 21, 22, and preceptors as well. And that's why we've got the business rates equalisation. So there'll be 2.33 million anticipated in the current year, and then that'll be drawn back in future years as that position's reversed.
Okay, so that figure at the bottom, where it says total budget for the year, that is the amount that we will actually have available to spend. Is that right, in each of those years?
We've currently got an amount in the equalisation reserve at the moment, and we'll top that up with around about 2.3 million this year, and then gradually that will be reversed out until it's all used up, I think.
What you're doing, Paul, is releasing money in the equalisation reserve, and you're releasing 7.52 million, I believe, adding those figures across. That's so you're putting aside 2.33 this year, but then it will come in over the next 3 years. Yes?
Yes, that's right. If we didn't do this, we'd have very large fluctuations because we collect so much business rates in. There would be huge shifts in our revenue budget if we didn't have that equalisation reserve. But may I just come in on this point, Councillor Barrett, please, on the rates?
Yes.
But with all our budgeting, we've assumed the business rates retention is staying at, it's going to increase, and we've ignored that by being very prudent with our accounting. But we could end up having a higher percentage of business rates retention, couldn't we? Do you have any stab in the dark as to how that could affect things, Paul? But there's a lot going on that's very difficult to judge. Firstly, there's the government are looking at the whole business rates retention scheme. That's been postponed a number of years now. It's now anticipated, I think, to come in 22, 23. Likewise, there's a business rate reset as well, which will probably happen in 22, 23 as well. In the current year, we've had a number of Section 31 grants, which covers, in this case, retail and nurseries. That means we haven't had to collect that money in the current year. We don't. Well, we haven't budgeted that will happen next year. But those industries may have trouble paying the business rates. So we do anticipate that there will be a loss this year because not everybody's been able to pay, and there'll be a higher.
Okay. But thank you, Paul. I believe Councillor Lamb would like to come in on this point. Is that okay, Councillor Barrett? Councillor Lamb?
I mean, I think much like with the pay award, if we end up having more coming in the form of business rates at the end of the day, that's great news. Same with any of the other income streams we have. It's a lovely problem to have to think about doing that. But we have a responsibility to try and set something that within reasonable estimation of what is currently the case will be balanced. And at the end of the day, we've got increasingly little room for manoeuvre in the form of reserves to cover it if we get wrong. So erring on the side of caution is something we're going to consistently do. If we end up having more money than we thought, then we're certainly in a position to try and relook at some of the things which may well be being turned off at the moment, or look at new things which people may well need. Certainly, there is going to be a hefty need for economic development and employment support over the next few years. But I really don't think at the moment getting too much money is going to be the issue. I think at the moment the reality is going back. Now we're back in a second lockdown. Now there's still no end in sight. Although the vaccine is certainly hopeful, we're still looking at potentially having to deal with this through to the end of next year. Financially, we don't anticipate things getting better, not for a while.
Councillor Barrett, does that clear things up for you on that point? Would you like
yes,
to?
I think so. Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for your contribution on that as well, which was useful. The next one is on 5.5.3. I wasn't clear why the new homes bonus became 0 after 2022-23, because I was assuming it would take longer than that for the legacy payments from the last few years of the scheme to taper off, given that they last for 4 years.
Karen? Yeah.
The final year of getting new homes bonus, which was for 4 years, was 2019-20. So 2019-20, take that forward 4 years, takes us to 22-23. So the final year of the legacy payments is 22-23. The new homes bonus we got this year was for 1 year only, whereas last year it was longer.
Okay, thank you. Again, I hadn't picked up on that previously, so yeah, thanks for the clarification.
Councillor, I believe you've got some more questions, Councillor Barrett?
Yes, if you're happy for me to carry on, Chair, thanks.
Yeah, I think so. We haven't got anybody else raising their hands at the moment.
Okay, thank you. If we then go on to the next page, paragraph 6.1, table 3, I wonder if Karen could just clarify, am I correct in thinking that the budget gap is shown as cumulative? So, for example, if you look at the gap of 2.25 million in 21-22, if we were to find savings to fill that gap, am I right in thinking we would only need 212,000 in the subsequent year? They're not additional requirements.
Karen?
Yes, that's correct. 512,000 the following year if you found the 2250.
Yes, sorry, 512, yes, sorry. The next one, paragraph 6.2, table 4, the summary of assumptions, the column relating to 2024-25 appears to be missing, unless the last column should actually read 24-25.
Karen? Yeah.
Apologies, my error. The last column is correct, whereas all the other columns need to be increased by a year. I do apologise. I will get that corrected for the website version.
Right. So the first column should actually refer to next year, not.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Then 6.2.3, back to pensions again, which Bob Lanza raised earlier, and I suppose I probably ought to declare a personal interest as I'm a deferred member of the pension scheme. This paragraph refers to savings in each of the coming 3 years as a result of a decrease in employers' pension contributions, which obviously, as has been said earlier, is welcome due to the fully funded nature of the West Sussex scheme. But I wasn't clear whether this is cumulative or not, and how that figure of 416,500 is reached. There is a reference in the last sentence to the savings in each of the 2 years, but are those additional? Is it a 138,800 saving, which is then increased to 141,600 the following year, or is that an additional saving? Sorry, I've probably not put that across very well.
Karen, please.
So in the current financial year, we built into the budget a saving of 136,100. Then if you add the 138.8 and the 141.6, that will make the 16,500. So it includes the current year. I should have made a note to make that clearer. Apologies.
Okay, so it's basically an additional saving for each of those 3 years, but then at the end of the 3 years, the 416 is the maximum.
So
yes, and then there'll be an actuarial revaluation then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Then the next one is paragraph 6.3, where it crosses over to page 28. There's a sentence at the end of that paragraph which says this report assumes that all contracts will be fully operational on 1st of April 2021 with no financial impact. And I wasn't totally clear how that related to the earlier part of the paragraph and what it's actually saying.
Karen, please.
What it's trying to say is that these assumptions in the report assume from the 1st of April that the leisure centre and the horse will be back to normal. We know at this stage it won't be, but we'll build that into the budget, and that's why we're setting aside the COVID reserve.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And then I think we're nearly there. Paragraph 7.2, the table at the top of page 29, where it's talking about a number of earmarked reserves that are going to be released. There's a government grant for transparency, which is also referenced in Appendix B, which says that it was originally intended to be spent on an FOI database. And I was just wondering, as it's a government grant, would it not be ring-fenced?
Karen again, please.
No, it's not ring-fenced. There are no conditions on this grant, and quite a lot of grants that we're getting at the moment, with the exception of homelessness, are not ring-fenced. So we can use it for that purpose.
Okay, thank you. So what happens about the FOI database? Is that not happening? Or?
We put in better process. We put in better processes using our own internal systems. We have been looking out for an FOI database, but we haven't found one yet that meets our needs. So we're just using internal spreadsheets at the moment. But when we do find one, we will get some more transparency money.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Barrett, have you finished, or you got one?
I've got one final one, if I may, and then that's the end of my list. Is on Appendix D, the capital strategy, on page 41, paragraph 5.1. There's a table which lists our investment property, which I've seen in these strategies before, but it's also followed by a second list of properties. Voluntary organisations, Station Road, Telford Place car park, etc., that I've never seen referenced in the strategy before. What category do those fall under, and what's included in the other category?
Cool.
Paul, you're not mute. Paul, can you unmute? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the ones in the table as investment properties agrees with what we've got in our Treasury reports. So they're properties that we've purchased for the sole purpose of achieving a yield to support our revenue budgets. And the bottom half of the table are properties that still achieve a return, but were either already owned or were purchased for another purpose. So you mentioned Telford Place, although that's achieving a yield as a car park at the moment, the primary purpose of its purchase was for affordable housing. The other category is made up of the Kidney Treatment Centre at Manor Royal and a property at Lynchmere Place for Crawley Parkour.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your indulgence, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. We're bringing now Councillor Lanza. I think he had his camera on earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've dealt with it another way. I just sent through a suggestion for an FOI system to the right sources. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Have we? No. Okay. Since nobody else has got any questions or comments, I'll just make a few of my own. So maybe Paul or Karen would like to answer this. We're doing a transfer
two reserves for the business rates of 2.33, but also we've got 1.169 as a transfer this year. Is that correct? Is my reading right? Is that Paul gonna?
Yeah.
Paul, please.
Yeah, well, the 1.169 was the budgeted transfer to reserves, and that will probably be picked up in the Q2 monitoring. It's not going to be 1.169 now because of COVID-related pressures.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Looking at the earmarked reserves that we're going to take away, the town centre markets, we've got a little reserve there of 13,000 that we're no longer earmarking, and I know that the existing market traders do feel marginalised at the moment, that they're not given a high enough profile, they're not included when we have special markets, for example, and I'm just wondering whether we're being a little bit mean taking away 13,000 to help them, because they do provide a service to the town. You know, the watchman, there's nobody else in Crawley that does that service, and he's there in the cold every Wednesday, Saturday, helping people in Crawley. I don't know whether that's one for Councillor Lamb there more. Councillor Lamb, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why we can't at a subsequent point allocate some capital to that if it's deemed at that time to be a priority. But right in the moment, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and freeing up money that's not being used right now and can't really be used right now on the basis of you know, us being stuck dealing with this, to have a reserve that we can use for any unplanned expenditure related to COVID is not a bad move. At some point in the future, we'll have to work out what the best thing to do is with the market. If you know, it remains a viable going concern by that point in time. But I think we're at least a year away from things returning to normal and really being able to plan to take decisions around things like that.
I think there's other social considerations with the market as well. It makes quite a pleasant atmosphere in a town square to see a market, and it's also, of course, quite healthy today to be trading in the open air. And I think that's something we need to take on board and maybe perhaps invest in our market a little bit more, because they do provide services that, you know, people can't afford to pay rates to do fruit and veg, but they can afford to do a market stall. And a lot of our Crawley residents enjoy going to the market to buy their fruit and veg and have their watches repaired. I think we need to embrace that as well. But
yeah, look, I think, you know, we have to bear in mind that when markets were popular was you know, a different time to where we are now. I mean, the reality is, well, if I could finish my
sorry.
You know, the reality is, if the public really wanted them, they'd go out and use them, and then they wouldn't be struggling. The reason they're struggling is because times have changed and demand is dropping, and as a result, people would rather shop in other ways. Now, we have done our best to try and, you know, make it a more attractive proposition. We took it back in-house to deal with the company that didn't seem to be doing a good job at the time. We've been trying to change locations to encourage greater use. This money is to do with capital expenditure related to it, though, so it's not going to be something which is going to be immediately deliverable to, you know, improve the facilities available. But once we're through the pandemic, in looking at the way the whole town centre is going to work, and let's bear in mind the town centre, you know, is undergoing rapid change anyway, which has then been accelerated by the pandemic to the nature of retail and the nature of what shop units are used for. But we're going to have to take account of all of this when we work out a new strategy for dealing with the market and retail as a whole. And there's not going to be any way of avoiding that. And regardless of what people may you know, want in terms of an idyllic sort of town centre, the reality is that that model has stopped being sustainable, you know, for quite some time. And there's no sign of things moving away from that. In fact, if anything, people have now got very used to ordering in a whole range of new things. that they never previously went onto the internet to get. And unless we can turn that around, ultimately we can spend an awful lot of taxpayers' money without achieving any significant increase in terms of the viability of these things.
Can I bring in Councillor Peter Smith, please, because I saw your camera was on. Councillor Smith, did you want to?
Thank you, Chair. I think Peter's explained the situation far better than I actually, but I did want to comment that we did in 2016, I think, had consultants in to look at the long-term future for the market, and we did identify at the time that there could be a long-term future for some of the reasons that you have just articulated yourself, Chair. The regeneration of the Queensway and the pavement was designed to support market stalls, and it is to the credit of our officers, Alfredo Mendez and his successors, that we still have a market actually operating at all. I go there myself to buy veg on Friday. I recommend it to everybody and it's very popular. But as Peter says, we do need to look at going forward what the actual offer is in terms of a bigger and more successful market, and more importantly a market that's complementary to the bricks and mortar stores. So we don't want to go into competition with them because that will just unsettle them, and we do need to, if we're going to relaunch it, we want to do it properly. It would take more than £13,000 to do that, and we just don't have the front. Well, I don't want to repeat what Peter said. It's not the right time to do it right now.
Thank you. I've had letters in from residents about the market and the fact that the market is sort of marginalised at the moment, and they're sad that it's not more central. But obviously we'll move on. But we all go to Horsham, and you go into the Carfax, and there are stalls everywhere on most days, and they're selling things that are different. And I think that's something that perhaps we could encourage. Councillor Peter Smith, yes.
If I may, Chair, the market is not marginalised at all. It's actually perfect for Crawley, and it's in the locations it's in at the moment are very well. They're doing the stalls that are there are coming back and voting with their feet because they're prosperous, and it's a market that suits Crawley. Horsham market is a different kettle of fish, but potentially we would want to enhance the offer and increase the type of stalls, but we can't do that on a half-baked basis. So we need to do it properly, and we'll do that when the time's right and when we've got the funds available. We've got more pressing priorities at the moment.
Okay. Right. Okay. I'll beg to differ on that, but we will move on. On page 31, Milkmount Flats figures. There's some big figures being quoted there for the repairs, but obviously the leaseholders will be contributing substantial funds to that because there's about 50 leaseholders out of the 140 flats there. Is that because you're not sure how much of the leaseholders' contribution you'll recover? But at the moment it's showing the worst possible case, isn't it? Maybe that's a question for Karen or Paul. Karen, thank you.
Thank you. We have to put in the capital programme what we as Crawley Borough Council spend on the works, and then we account for the income from the leaseholders separately. So that is the cost of the works.
Right, and it is considerably higher than what we budgeted for the pumping, isn't it? It's 400,000 more than over double what we were.
Yes, I did ask the housing team to provide more information, so that information in the report is from them.
Okay. On page 41, back to the assets, the property assets that we've got there. You've given valuation there. It would be quite nice, I think, for members of the public to actually know what these assets cost us, and therefore they could get an appreciation of the increase or decrease in value. Would you agree? Yes, perhaps one for Paul more.
Yeah, thank you. We could do, it gets more difficult for the older properties, particularly when we haven't purchased them recently. The cost price might not bear any relation to the current valuation, and it also wouldn't include any. Do we include any the works that have been done on them subsequently and things? So we could do it, but it might complicate the picture.
So any works done to them would have been written off, you're saying?
No, it would. So it would have been added. It might have enhanced the property, or at least maintained it in its current state.
Well, then that would be included in the cost of the property to date, wouldn't it? Any fixed asset register would have that
Yes,
information.
Yes, we do have that information. Yeah.
Okay. It's just I think anybody looking at it would think, gosh, that's their value, but what do they actually cost? To give a sort of a interesting guide of how well we've invested, because interest rates are so low, which is depressing to look at. It's nice to see that we've actually invested some money wisely and property has increased.
Yeah, sorry, but some of them we might have paid a high price for because they had a high paying tenant in there, and should that be relet at a later time, it might show an overly high price compared to the current valuation.
Ah, okay.
Just for instance, not necessarily in these cases, and it could be in the future that might be the case.
Yeah, it might have a revaluation downwards. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Has any other members got any questions, please? In which case, thank you very much for the report. So all committee members have had a chance to speak. We'll move on to the recommendation. I move that the Commission notes the report and requests that the views expressed during the debate are fed back to the Cabinet through the Commission's comment sheet, and ask that the Vice Chair seconds. Councillor Rana, please can you second?
Yes, Chair, I second that.
Thank you. The recommendations are agreed. Moving on then to agenda item 7. We're now going to receive the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review 2021, also from Councillor Lamb, Karen Hayes and Paul Windlass. Please can I ask the leader to introduce and present the report to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're going to be sick of us by the end of tonight if you're not already. This is the council has considerable assets, even when on paper financially we're struggling. We collect council tax on behalf of everyone in the area. We collect business rates on behalf of everyone in the area. We have a considerable amount of money in our accounts at any one period of time, and we have a treasury management strategy for how we where we put that and what sort of return we get on that. And certainly the council in the past has done quite well. Before the market started to go belly up, back in about 2006, we were getting about £6 million worth of income a year for that. So it's about half of what we're going to have moving forward, equivalent to that. As the report sets out in front of you today, we get less. In fact, we get a lot less, partly because we spend a lot of that, but also because interest rates are not only starting out low, but they've gone even lower than we thought they could go. As a result of the Bank of England trying to keep the economy going through the current pandemic. So this report will set out where all of that money is being put in terms of the appendices and detail. But the essential conclusion to take away from it is that while the council is doing its absolute best to invest its money, the reality is in some cases we're even having to invest things for no additional yield, just to have that money put somewhere. It's not all bad in the grand scheme of things, or at least we're not as bad off as some, because if you're investing in the bond market at the moment, you can get a negative interest rate where you're not going to get your money back ever out of buying a government bond, but I guess at least it's kind of safe.
You're on mute, Chair.
Mute, I am on mute, sorry. Thank you for that presentation. The process for discussion on the report will be as we have done previously. Therefore, please indicate by turning your camera on, and we'll move on to the consideration of the report. Councillor Lanza, please.
Yep, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Just referring to page 4 of the report and the detailed holdings. We've got a building society up there with a credit rating listed as AAA, which I think is stronger than the national sovereign credit rating. I just wonder how that could be.
Thank you, Councillor Lanza. Yes, in the case of Leeds Building Society, that is a covered bond, so it's backed by secure government bonds.
Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You won't be surprised to know that it's me again. Not quite so many questions on this one, but one or two, if I may.
Okay, do you want to do them one at a time then, Councillor Barrett?
Yes, yeah.
Please.
Paragraph 7.4 in the report. The last paragraph there at the bottom of page 46 refers to the fact that we've had to invest in at 0% in some cases, which obviously is not something we're used to doing, and not something many of us have had experience of before. And I just wondered if Karen or Paul could explain what the practical alternatives are to that at the current time, because it doesn't seem to be something we'd want to do unless we were absolutely forced.
Paul, would you like to answer that, please?
Yeah, thank you. This has just been where we've needed to invest for relatively short periods of time, just 2 or 3 weeks maybe. And we've had to make a decision to invest with the government at 0%. We could have left it in our bank account, but that's also achieving 0%. And that would have been a higher risk as well than the government where we did invest. Since then, we have expanded the number of money market funds we have, which does give us more options going forward. But then again, they're also, some of those are also paying close to zero. They did go zero briefly earlier, but now just slightly above. But it could be, we might in the future have to invest again zero or even negative should base rates go lower.
Okay, thank you. Next one, if I may, is on Appendix 1, the list of counterparties. I was just surprised that we currently have so few investments with banks compared to previous years. There's only 2, one with DBS in Singapore and one with UBS in Switzerland. And I just wondered, could we not get a higher yield with those?
Paul?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the ones with banks at the moment were taken out earlier, pre-COVID. Subsequently, banks are offering, so they're higher risk during the pandemic, and they are offering lower rates at the moment for equivalent periods than investing with local authorities.
Okay, thank you. And then further, also on Appendix 1, on the second page of that, page 49, at the bottom of the days to mature column, there's a figure of 128, and it wasn't totally clear to me what that is. Is that the average day to maturity? The average length of time to maturity?
Yes, that's the overall average for our portfolio. So it's a weighted average, takes into account each value of each investment into consideration.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, if I may, on Appendix 2, it's just a question with the pie charts. The one at the bottom of page 52 that shows the country limits shows both the Singapore and Swiss bank deposits. But the one on page 53, which shows sector diversification, just shows £5 million invested with non-UK banks, which appears to be just the Singapore investment. And I wonder what's the reason for the discrepancy there and why the Swiss one wasn't included.
Paul?
Yep, it's because that one's shown in that pie chart as CDs or certificates of deposit. as a point of note, it might be the last time you see these pie charts, because these were provided by our previous Treasury advisors, so we might see something different next time.
Okay, thanks. I would just comment on that actually from a member point of view, reading these, I noticed the ones on the website are actually in colour, and I know there's a cost implication, but when we have reports with colour things on, it is awfully difficult to sort of judge between the dark grey and the light grey, and if it is possible for members to have the coloured ones, it would be great. I know there is a cost implication, but it does make it an awful lot easier when you're trying to plough through a long report.
I don't think that is possible at the moment, Richard, apparently.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
is that your...
Yes, sorry, that was my last question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Anybody else have any questions? Councillor Lamb, you've got your camera on. Do you wish to comment at all? No? Okay. So all committee members have had an opportunity to speak now. So we'll move on to the recommendation. I move that the Commission notes the report and requests that the views expressed during the debate are fed back to the Cabinet through the Commission's comment sheet, and ask that the Vice Chair second. Councillor Rana, please can you second?
Yes, I second that. Thank you.
The recommendations are agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 8, budget monitoring. We're now going to receive the report again from Councillor Lamb, Karen Hayes and Paul. Please can I ask the leader to introduce and present the report to the committee. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting because usually I can't remember budget monitoring coming to OSC, so I guess this has been called in, which means it's the first time I get to go through this. The council has its budget, which is set every February, and then each quarter officers prepare a report outlining actual expenditure against the projected expenditure which was put into the budget. It will not surprise members to know that our budget this year has not been kept to that well. Indeed, we are in substantial deficit compared to what was estimated at the time. This deficit actually decreased since quarter one. Quarter one, it was at 1.2 million. It's now down to 881, which is the result of actually more government funding coming in for the most part. The council has also been making in-year savings to try and deal with some of the increase in expenditure. But yes, we are significantly overspent a number of things, and it's directly the result of COVID, as you can see by reading each of the specific areas listed. Members might also be interested by table 5.2, which outlines council's actual expenditure on each COVID item, the council's lost income and the money we've had from the government. There appears to be some debate about this, about whether or not the council's had surplus money compared to what it would usually have. I think this report makes it very clear that our income is significantly down on what it would usually be, and the money we receive from government has been compensation for costs incurred and income loss over the course of the several lockdowns the government has instituted. At this current time, we are still owed considerable amounts of money from central government if they are to live up to their initial commitment to pay us every penny that we would incur during the course of this. I'm open to questions.
Thank you for the presentation, Councillor Lamb. The process for discussion on the report will be as before. Each committee member will have the opportunity to speak, so please indicate by turning your camera on, and we will begin the consideration of the report. No members? Have no queries? Councillor Bob Burgess. Councillor Bob Burgess.
Thank you, Chair. On page 56, paragraph 5.1, the general fund, can I have a bit of clarification, please? The figures alongside environmental services and sustainability show an increase between quarter 2 and quarter 1 in the variance, and is classed as unfavourable. For housing, though, it shows a decrease between quarter 2 and quarter 1. That's also looked upon as being unfavourable. So in one sense, it's saying A decrease is good. Another one is saying a decrease is bad. Can I have clarification on that, please? Are there some brackets missing somewhere? I don't know.
Paul, would you like to answer that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The favourable and unfavourable marks purely relate to against the original budget, not against how we were doing at Q1.
Councillor Lamb?
No, I was just going to say what Paul was going to say.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Councillor Barrett, your questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I've got a number of, if we follow the same process, obviously, if you want to bring others in partway through, then, you know.
Thank you.
Please do that. My first question is also on page 56. Is paragraph 5.2. It's just some clarification, really, because the table shows, with regard to sports, leisure and community facilities, the table shows additional expenditure within that budget heading. But again, but there's also lost income in the same area in the second part of the table. And it's not clear to me as to where the demarcation lies between the two figures. In other words, what's included as additional expenditure as opposed to lost income? Because surely most of the extra cost we're absorbing in terms of leisure services is lost income because of people not using the facility.
Paul, is that one for you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to take K2 as the prime example here. The lost income is the contractual value that was due to the council this year, and that's now not going to be received. The additional expenditure is amounts on top of that just to keep the centre open at a reduced capacity. So in the example of K2, we're reporting a total loss of 1.415 million. That's shown in the appendix, and that's made up of 893,000 for lost income and 522,000 for additional expenditure.
Okay.
Is that
that's and I'm assuming it's a similar case in other in terms of some of the other facilities as well.
Yes, that's right. This is taken from so the COVID reporting in that table is taken from a return we do to government to report our lost income and additional expenditure we've incurred.
Okay, thank you. The second one is paragraph 5.2.1. That refers to a requirement for additional staffing in the contact centre, but one of the savings proposed in the budget strategy involves deleting 2 vacant posts in the contact centre team. So isn't there a contradiction there?
Councillor Lamb, would you like to answer this one?
Well, I mean, this is to do with this year's actual expenditure, and the budget is to do with next year's projected expenditure. And it's worth bearing in mind, during the first lockdown, we were undertaking a massive organising exercise to try and reach out to the town's vulnerable community and to coordinate an awful lot of response around the pandemic. It is not anticipated, and certainly when we look at the comparison in terms of demand in the second lockdown compared to the first lockdown, the demand is nothing like it was back in that initial lockdown. So in terms of this year, we've had to put more resources in order to deal with the fact that we were dealing with an unprecedented circumstance. Next year, those posts are not going to be seeing those, or at least the contact centre as a whole is not going to be seeing that sort of pressure.
Okay, thank you. I suppose what I'm just trying to explore is that we're not putting a saving in that's not going to be achievable.
I believe it's achievable.
Okay, thank you. If we could then go on to paragraph 5.2.7, investment income. This says more certainty over future cash flow has enabled some longer term investments for which the interest rate the council receives is higher. That seemed to me to contradict what was said about investment returns in the last report that we considered, the Treasury management one. So I just wondered if
Paul, would you like to
comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. At the start of the pandemic, we were keeping our investments short because we didn't know the impact on our income for the rest of the year. We had a number of suppliers or business rates payers that just stopped paying us immediately, and it wasn't until later on in the summer that their position became clearer. Since then, yeah, it's become much more stable and predictable, and we've been able to put our money out longer. It's been at a higher rate, but it's all proportionate, really. Interest rates are lower, but if you go out longer, you do get a slightly higher rate. Interest rates are continuing to fall, though.
Councillor Barrett, do you like?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks very much for that. If you want me to carry on, paragraph 8.1 with the capital programme, what really struck me about this table was that, what really struck me about this table was that when you look at the spend to the end of Q2 for a large proportion of the capital budget, that it's actually a very small amount that's been spent, a very small proportion, and certainly not half, which is what you would normally expect in a normal year to be spent by the end of Q2. Obviously, this is not a normal year, but even so. But then the estimated outcome column, in many cases, predicts that we'll be spending a much higher amount, almost up to the full budget. And I just wondered, how realistic is that as a prediction? Because it seems very ambitious, because what we're basically saying is that we've spent a very small proportion of our capital budget during the first 6 months, but we're expected to spend most of the allocation by the end of the year. And I just wondered how realistic that is, because obviously it does mean an awful lot of catch up during the second half of the year.
Another one for you, Paul. You're muted.
Get used to this soon.
Thank you.
We are awaiting an updated cash flow for the town halls that may see further money slipped to next year. I should also point out there are a few schemes in the programme, such as the purchase of properties, that may slip if we do not find them before year end. But those types of scheme will either be fully spent or fully slipped. It won't be a pro rata amount, so just holding on until information is available later in the year before making that determination.
Okay, thank you. If I can then go on to, it's a couple of questions on paragraph 9.1, capital programme section 106 funding, and this specifically relates to play areas. The table at the top of page 62 shows several budget headings for play area refurbishments having been removed, and I just wonder what that means in practical terms for the future of these schemes, particularly for the Wakeham's Green play area in my own ward and your ward, Chair. We both know how much needed that is, and it's something that was going to come forward, and this seems to suggest that and a number of others are going to be slipped. I have absolutely no problem with the 4 that are being proposed, because they're all very necessary as well. But what I don't want to see is that obviously we have some going backwards, and I just wondered what this actually means. Does it mean they'll have to be funded in future years, or is it simply saying that they will be funded a different way?
Paul, can I give you a couple of seconds to think of an answer on that while we bring Raj in, because he needs to declare any interest if he has any, please. Raj, are you online, and can you turn your camera on, please, so I can see you? Councillor Sharman? No. It's back to you then, Paul, if you can carry on the show for me.
Thank you, Chair. A member working group's been set up to look at the allocation of place schemes. In relation to Wakeham's, there were some necessary repairs that were completed. But Wakeham's is one of those that will be going into the discussion as a high priority to the working group to decide on within the next 2 to 3 years of investment.
Okay.
Councillor Ryan, do you want to come back on that one? Or?
Well, I mean, yes, obviously just to say that, I mean, I know our colleague Kevin McCarthy is on working group, and I'm sure he'll be banging the drum for that one. But obviously, it's one that I wouldn't want to see slip off the programme. And the other question really relates to the four schemes shown on pages 62 and 63 and the funding. And it was just looking at the detailed funding proposed for the individual schemes. I can't help noticing that some of them are very small amounts indeed. I mean, one of them is £11 from a particular development, another one's £85. And I just wondered why we've ended up with small amounts like that are being allocated in that way.
Paul, one for you.
Yeah, thank you. Those small amounts are just balances left over from previous schemes that have been reallocated. They might have been underspent and they've been reallocated to the new programme.
Okay, thank you. So it's just clearing up what's left over, basically. Okay. And then finally, Chair, there's a question on Appendix 1.1, so on page 65, and it sort of follows on from something that you asked under the budget strategy report. I just want to check I've read this correctly, because the table shows an original planned contribution to reserves of £1.169 million in 2021, but it then shows an unfavourable variance of 881,000 as a result of everything that's happened since March, leading to a revised transfer of 288,000. Now, I just wonder, am I reading this correctly? And if so, is this saying that even allowing for the effects of the COVID crisis, we're still going to achieve a surplus budget this year and be able to put £288,000 back into reserve? Or have I missed something?
Can I just bring Councillor Sharman in just very quickly, Councillor Barrett, while Karen prepares our answer there. Councillor Sharman, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Can you just confirm your ward, please, and the minutes and any declarations that you may have?
Well, first of all, my apologies for joining in late. Had an emergency that I had to attend. Yes, Councillor Raj Sharma from Southgate. I have no declaration of interest to declare, and I have no whipping instructions either. And do my apologies, please.
Thank you very much. Heather, will you note what Councillor Sharman has said? And we'll now go back to Karen, if she's there to answer Councillor Barrett's question. Karen, you're live now.
Thank you. When we set the budget back in February, we budgeted to transfer 1.169 million to reserves. The reason we did that is we were really notified very late in December what our settlement was, and we got new homes bonus that we weren't expecting, so we were in a better position. Back in February, we were planning to transfer that money to reserves with the aim of not having to borrow as much in future for our capital programme. We're now in a position that we've got an overspend of 881,000. So yes, we will be transferring to reserves 288,000 as of this report. I wouldn't want at this stage to transfer it into the capital programme reserve. I would put it in the COVID reserve right now. And then in a year or so's time, we can relook at all our different reserves and potentially transfer to the capital programme reserve to reduce borrowing. Good financial management is really important to us. We need adequate reserves to get through the pandemic and to fund our ambitious capital programme. The budget strategy does address this and gives me, as a Section 151 officer, no concerns. And we've raised our budget position with our external auditor with their value for money conclusion, and they say overall we've got good governance, project management and good risk management where appropriate. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett, would you like to come back up?
Well, thank you very much. That's very helpful. But can I just be clear? So what this is still technically a surplus budget for this year?
There will be a small transfer to reserves this year. Okay, yeah, we at the beginning of the pandemic, we made significant savings because we didn't know that we would get some funding from government. We made £1.75 million worth of savings. We're not 1.75 million in surplus.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other members that would like to ask any questions or comments? Oh, sorry, Councillor Barrett, have you finished? Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I would just, I'd just like to make one comment or question for Paul and Karen. Do you think it would help if we actually had the date that these budgets and projected outturns were actually compiled, so that people, members of the public, could actually see the time difference between our latest budget and when you projected, so they can see that it was 6 months ago? Or because you're just looking at these cold, you don't know when on the timeline when those figures were agreed. So if it's very difficult to look and think, gosh, yeah, you may know when you did that projected outturn, but members of the public don't, and they can't understand why the figures have changed so much. But if they knew the dates of when the figures were put together, perhaps it would help them appreciate it a bit better.
Okay.
Because you said yourself that, oh, we did this in February, but anybody looking at this report cold wouldn't know that.
Okay, so in paragraph 1.1 it says it's to the quarter to September. So in future reports we can refer to the budget was set in February, but it does actually give you that that's to the end of September where we're reporting to.
Absolutely. I'm not talking about the period it's covering. I'm talking about when the figures were compiled, the actual date. So what knowledge you've got of COVID or whatever, people will know, oh, February, that was before we had the restrictions. September, that's before the second lockdown, whatever. I mean, September's figures could have been prepared in November, you know as well as I do as an accountant. It's the date and hindsight of post-balance sheet events is quite, you know, powerful on figures. So it's just a comment, that was all. Sorry.
To get a report ready for the February Cabinet, we're preparing it now, December and January. So it's well in advance of February to go through Cabinet briefing and other meetings. So there is a big gap between when we set the budget.
I think, and that's why I feel it's quite useful to have a date there of when it was compiled. It's the same as any set of company accounts are always signed off with a date on them, so that people know the date that they were agreed and signed off. If there was any observation as an accountant, I just thought it might give people a better comprehension of the figures, that was all. Anyway, not a criticism in any shape or form, just an observation. Anyway, I hope committee members have found that an interesting report, and I thank the three of you for being patient with us and presenting all three reports to us. So now we'll move on to the recommendation. I move that the Commission notes the reports and requests the views expressed during the debate are fed back to Cabinet through the Commission's comment sheet, and ask that the Vice Chair second. Councillor Rana, please can you second?
Yes, Chair, I second that.
The recommendations are agreed. We now come on to HASC. The last meeting of HASC took place on November the 11th. Please can I ask Councillor Bob Burgess to provide a brief update from that meeting?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. It might not be a brief update because the meeting, the main item on the agenda concerned the restoration of primary care in West Sussex and future planning for primary care in West Sussex. We spent over 3 hours looking at it, so there's a lot to say, but so my apologies. The first thing to say is that as a result of COVID-19, a decision was taken back in April to merge the several CCGs in West Sussex into an overall CCG for the whole county. And also during the year, there was a major piece of work carried out, which was entitled Assessing Health and Care Services Findings During the Coronavirus Pandemic. This was carried out jointly by Health Watch in Sussex and also the Sussex NHS Commissioners. A variety of surveys were carried out, promoted in a number of different ways. Respondents were characterised by age, gender, those with physical disabilities, those from the Black and Asian minority ethnic groups, those who identified themselves as being lesbian, gay or bisexual, and also those who identified as being heterosexual. However, it was also recognised that there were people and communities that were not represented in the work carried out, and so further work will be done and is also currently being done to establish the views of such people. Some major key headlines emerged. First one is that a large minority or all respondents chose not to make an appointment during the pandemic, despite having a need to access health, social or emotional care. Secondly, those with disabilities were more likely to delay appointment making. And this was also true of women compared with men. However, there were high levels of satisfaction by those who made appointments by phone, video or online. But those who were least satisfied were those with disabilities and those from the LGBT community. Phone contact was the preferred way for things such as routine visits, triage, repeat prescriptions, test results, and so on. But a large proportion of those with mental health issues were not happy to receive any form of remote appointment, as also were those with physical disabilities. And this was regardless of ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or age. Older people preferred face-to-face appointments with a GP, and they also thought it was important for any appointment to be with their regular GP. And women of all ages also thought this was true and should be the case. Several people, as I've said, chose to delay appointments despite having a need. There were comments such as, felt the condition was not serious enough, did not want to burden the NHS, thought I would wait until the pandemic was over. These are very common comments that were made. Finally, though, a large proportion of those with emotional and mental health conditions were not happy for any support to be provided remotely when they have a need. Several initial recommendations emerged. The report did emphasise that the message from the NHS is it is open for business, and that the campaign Help Us to Help You has merit and needs strengthening, especially amongst those more likely to delay appointments. And I'll come on to that a bit more about that shortly. It was also agreed that any communication must be in appropriate forms and ways and is both received and understood. Also, there needs to be engagement with those who are more likely to delay appointments and encourage them not to delay, and encourage them not to delay. It was also felt that parents should be allowed to choose their preferred method of engagement, including face-to-face consultation. And patients should have the opportunity to choose to have appointments with their regular GP. It was important that health and care services should provide remote appointments for specific times, not just we will call you back at some time in the afternoon or tomorrow morning. It was also felt very much strongly that the technology skills of some health professionals involved in remote appointments need improving. The report then went on to look at the future, because there will need to be significant changes to the ways that the system operates, not least because of an increase in both the population and housing need. For instance, by 2030, it is estimated there will be a need for 3,861 new homes in Crawley, which equates to an extra 8,000 880 people. But also within that, projected data suggests that the 0 to 4 years old cohort will reduce by 962. The 5 to 9 cohort will reduce by 226. The 65 to 84 cohort will, however, increase by 3,826. So there are challenges which are coming on board as we go along. HASC basically considered 4 key areas for developing the work. These are, first of all, restoration and recovery. A lot of work will need to be done to restore services to pre-COVID levels. It was recognised that, and there was some criticism that GPs, in a sense, hadn't done their bit as much as people hoped that they would. It is also important to remember that there are many frail and elderly people living on their own, in their own homes, and not in care homes. This group of people should be receiving better care. Also, how can the work with hard-to-reach groups be properly evaluated? The programmes that are put in place must be responsive ones, responsive to both demand and needs. Another point that was made is that with new housing developments coming on board, which will involve Section 106 and SIL money, how can the CG engage effectively at an early stage with the planning system? Could the local council help in the promotion of health issues? I know that we have the Crawley Wellbeing team here, and Crawley Live was also mentioned as a possible way of doing something.
Councillor Burgess,
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. May I just ask you not to be waving your hands about quite so much, because it's affecting. You're giving us a Harry Potter with the invisible cloak.
I'm nice. I apologise. Right.
And we do love to see your face.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right. So where was I? Oh yes. So question about, how can the community be involved effectively, and how can hostility and negativity that some people have towards vaccinations be overcome? And this was one which was very much heartfelt. What can be done to prevent aggressive receptionists at GP surgeries? So work definitely needs to be done on how GPs can work better for their patients. But how can the county council and the districts and boroughs help out in this? It was felt there needs to be better referrals to reduce bureaucratic workload. There needs to be an avoidance of any barriers between patient and GP. And if a patient provides avoidable times, i.e. times when they cannot make the appointment, these must be kept to. Also, there are going to be new roles coming in place within GP practices, providing more different services. And as I've mentioned earlier, there are the challenges of an increasing population over the next 10 years. And one thing that needs to be looked at quite seriously is how can back office work in surgeries be reduced to enable more frontline work to take place. Finally, on this, work needs to be done with the districts and boroughs when looking at new developments, where we're going to have increased dwellings, increased number of householders. So what can be done so that we've got collaborative working taking place? With that in mind, I received over the weekend an email from somebody called Cara Horn, who's the communications lead at Health Watch West Sussex. It's got some very interesting information. I'm not certain whether I'm the only person who has received this. Can I ask, has any other councillor, Crawley Borough councillor, received this email? Because if they haven't, I'm inclined to get it sent round to all councillors, because there are some very interesting things that we can be doing to help, not least some posters that can be put up into community notice boards. So can I ask the question first of all, has this been received by other councillors?
No, hasn't been received by me.
Right, okay. Can I suggest therefore,
Yes,
Chair,
I've received one.
You have?
Chair, yes, I have.
Was that Richard?
Yes, it is Richard, sorry. Yeah.
Right, okay. Can I suggest that I send this out to all councillors because it's got a couple of attachments to it, and then maybe we as a commission can make a decision as to what are going to be done with it via a remote meeting at some time. But there's a lot of very good stuff in it. It's basically launching a campaign called Ask Us, Tell Us, which wants to encourage local people to ask questions and share their feedback on health and care services. Finally, we were told that in the event of any vaccine rollout, West Sussex is not likely to be in the first tranche of any rollout, and therefore the health professionals need to manage expectation, and we maybe as councillors need to do that as well. But the likelihood is that the vulnerable will be the first to receive any vaccine before the rest of the population. Thank you very much indeed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Burgess, for a very comprehensive report. Thank you. Forward plan now. The forthcoming decision list is featured on your agenda and also on the council's website. I will ask Democratic Services team to list those that have been referred. Heather, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As Commission members can see from the agenda, the following 6 reports have been referred to the OSC meeting on the 1st of February, and these will be considered by Cabinet on the 3rd of February. So the 6 reports so far are the Economic Development Strategy, proposed Article 4 directions, changes of use from C3 to C4, houses of multiple occupation, the Climate Change Scrutiny Panel final reports, the Budget and Council Tax report, Treasury Management Strategy and Budget Monitoring Quarter 3. So they are the ones that have already been referred. I would also like to add that given the number of reports on the agenda, timings will be crucial for the February meeting, and virtual meetings tend to be limited to a maximum of 4 hours.
Given the number of items on that agenda and to ensure sufficient time to fully scrutinise the items, I propose that we start the 1st of February meeting at 6:30. What do members think? Would that be a good option to pursue? Have a one-off 6:30 start? Do members agree, please?
Yes, I think that's a very good time.
Okay, by me.
Yeah, that's fine by me.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Good. I think Councillor Rana, I heard you there, so can I take that as you second this proposal?
Yes, I do second. I wouldn't even mind if it's 6 o'clock actually. Then we can finish earlier.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Supplemental. Oh, sorry.
Which will it be, 6 or 6:30?
6:30.
6:30, I would have thought.
Yeah, 6:30.
6:30 because we got the officers. I've got to have a short break. 6:30.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
You're okay with that? Yes.
Yep, all good.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll make the 1st of February 6:30. Is everybody happy with the agenda? You don't want any other reports brought in, hopefully? No? Councillor Barrett.
Well, thank you, Chair. It's 2 things really. Firstly, I just wanted to ask what's planned on the agenda for our January meeting, because there's nothing mentioned here.
Heather?
Yep, thank you, Councillor Barrett. Currently, there are no items on the forward plan for January. There's nothing on the forward plan for January Cabinet. There are no items on the for the OSC in January either. So I will be having a conversation with the chair regarding the meetings for January. Watch this space, Councillor Barrett.
Okay, thank you. And then, Chair, actually, the reason I turned, although I was going to ask that question, the reason I turned my camera on was I actually wanted to say something on item 9, the HASC meeting, but after Councillor Burgess's report, you moved straight on. I wondered if I could just beg your indulgence just to make a very quick comment.
Of course.
I really just wanted to thank Bob for a very comprehensive report and for his attendance at the meeting and coming back to us on this. Because, you know, this is how it's supposed to work. I've been back on this this commission as a member, I think, since March, which is 8 months now. And I think it's the 6th meeting we've had since then. And this is the first time we've actually had a proper report on the agenda for HASC with a representative reporting back on what they've done and what they've heard and what's happened at those meetings, which is exactly how it should be happening. And I really just wanted to say how, you know, how good that was and long may it continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. You're making me blush.
Well,
good job your camera's switched off then, isn't it?
Right, thank you. Supplemental agenda. There is no supplemental agenda, and with the business of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission of the 23rd of November concluded, the meeting is now closed at 21:01. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Good night, Chair. Good night, everybody.
Well, thank
And
you.
once
Good
again,
night.
Good night. Thank you.
good night.
Okay. In